You're a Roman legionary standing in formation, watching your centurion demonstrate the pilum throw at a wooden target 30 meters away. The iron shank bends on impact exactly as designed, rendering the enemy's shield useless. You've practiced this thousands of times. What you don't know, what nobody in your century knows, is that the weapon in your hands generates muzzle energy comparable to a modern 9mm handgun, and the physics governing its penetration through human tissue would remain unmatched by handheld projectile weapons for over 1,000 years. Right now, in ballistics laboratories across the world, weapons engineers are discovering something uncomfortable. The Roman pilum represents nearly optimal design for a thrown anti-personnel weapon, and its terminal ballistics, the science of what happens when it hits a human body, demonstrate engineering principles that modern militaries spent centuries rediscovering. The standard narrative treats ancient weapons as primitive compared to firearms, but when you actually run the physics, when you measure the kinetic energy transfer and penetration characteristics, when you account for accuracy at combat ranges, the pilum doesn't just compete with early firearms. In several critical metrics, it outperforms them. Let me show you why a weapon designed 2,000 years ago remained more lethal than a musket until the mid-1800s, and what that reveals about the actual mathematics of killing that military historians prefer not to discuss in detail. Here's what we know about pilum construction from archaeological evidence and experimental archaeology. The weapon consisted of a wooden shaft approximately 1.2 meters long attached to an iron shank of equal length, topped with a pyramidal point. Total weight approximately 2 kilograms. The iron shank was the critical innovation, soft iron that would bend on impact, preventing the enemy from throwing it back and weighing down their shield until they had to discard it. But that's the tactical story. The ballistic story is far more disturbing. A trained legionary could throw a pilum at velocities approaching 30 meters per second. Kinetic energy equals 1/2 mass times velocity squared. At 2 kilograms and 30 meters per second, that's 900 joules of energy on impact. A modern 9mm parabellum round generates approximately 500 joules. A 45 ACP generates about 600. The pilum is delivering more kinetic energy to the target than most modern handguns. And unlike a small caliber bullet that might pass through tissue causing a narrow wound channel, the pilum's pyramidal point creates a wound profile approximately 4 centimeters wide, driving deep into the body with enough force to penetrate both sides of a ribcage. You're standing in the front rank now. The enemy line is 40 meters away. Your centurion gives the order. You step forward with your left foot, rotating your hips, your right arm extending in a motion you've drilled until it's automatic. The pilum leaves your hand. Flight time is approximately 1.3 seconds. You've already drawn your gladius because you know what happens next. The pilum impacts the enemy shield wall. Some hit shields, those shields are now useless, dragging on the ground with 2 meters of bent iron attached. Some hit bodies, those men are screaming, the ones hit in the torso are dying, the ones hit in limbs are out of the fight. You advance into the chaos you've created. Modern ballistics testing using synthetic tissue analogs, gel blocks designed to replicate human muscle and bone, shows that a pilum thrown at combat velocity will penetrate approximately 45 centimeters into tissue. That's complete penetration through a human torso. Entry wound diameter 4 centimeters. Exit wound diameter when it exits 8 to 12 centimeters as the pyramidal point tears through tissue. Blood loss is catastrophic. Even with modern trauma surgery, survival rate for a pilum strike to the torso would be under 30%. In ancient combat, with no antibiotics, no blood transfusion, no understanding of infection control, you're dead. Maybe in an hour, maybe in 3 days from sepsis, but you're dead. Now compare this to early firearms. A matchlock musket from the 1500s generated approximately 1,500 joules, more than a pilum, certainly. But accuracy at 40 meters was terrible. A trained musketeer might hit a man-sized target at that range 30% of the time under ideal conditions. In combat, with stress and smoke and moving targets, 20% if you're lucky. A trained legionary could hit a man-sized target with a pilum at 40 meters approximately 60% of the time. Roman tactical manuals specify that pilum volleys were most effective at ranges of 20 to 30 meters, where accuracy approached 80%. The pilum was more likely to hit what you aimed at than a musket was for the first 300 years after firearms were invented. But here's where it gets truly disturbing from a modern perspective. Rate of fire. A musketeer in the 1700s, well-trained, could fire perhaps 3 rounds per minute. Loading required measuring powder, ramming the ball, priming the pan, a complex sequence that had to be executed correctly under combat stress. A legionary carried 2 pila. Throw time, approximately 2 seconds each. A Roman sentry could deliver 2 massed volleys in under 10 seconds, putting approximately 160 projectiles into an enemy formation before closing to sword range. The volume of fire was higher, the accuracy was higher, and the wounds were comparably lethal. This is the part military historians rarely mention in detail because it forces uncomfortable questions about technological progress. The pilum represents an evolutionary endpoint in thrown weapon design. Every variable is optimized. Weight distribution for maximum range and accuracy, iron shank length calculated for optimal penetration, pyramidal point geometry designed to maximize tissue damage while maintaining structural integrity through bone strikes. Roman engineers didn't have computers or ballistics gelatin, but they had something equally valuable. 4 centuries of continuous warfare providing immediate feedback on what actually killed people effectively. The pilum's design was refined through tens of thousands of combat engagements until it achieved near-optimal performance within the constraints of human throwing capability. You're in the aftermath now. The enemy line has broken. You're walking through the field checking bodies. This is standard procedure. Wounded enemies are threats until they're not. You see what a pilum does up close. A man hit in the chest, the iron shank protruding from his back, still technically alive but drowning in his own blood. Another hit in the abdomen, intestines perforated, already septic, maybe 12 hours left. A man hit in the thigh, femoral artery severed, already bled out. These aren't quick deaths. The pilum doesn't kill instantly unless it hits the heart or major vessels. It kills through trauma and blood loss and infection. You don't think about this. You've seen it too many times. This is what victory looks like at ground level. Modern analysis of skeletal remains from Roman battlefields shows pilum wounds with disturbing frequency. Archaeologists at Alesia found over 100 skeletons with penetrating trauma consistent with pilum strikes. Entry wounds in the chest and abdomen, bone scoring showing the characteristic pattern of the pyramidal point passing through ribs. Trauma analysis on these remains reveals that many of these individuals survived long enough after being struck for inflammation response to begin in the bone tissue. That means they lived for hours or days with catastrophic internal injuries before dying. The pilum wasn't designed for clean kills. It was designed to remove enemies from combat effectiveness permanently, and if that meant a slow death from internal bleeding and infection, that was acceptable within Roman military doctrine. The crossbow presented similar ballistics but required extensive training and had reload times measured in minutes. The English longbow achieved comparable penetration, but required lifelong training starting in childhood. Skeletal remains of English archers show distinctive bone deformation from the repetitive stress of drawing 150-pound bows. The pilum required strength and practice, but not specialized anatomy. Any fit adult male could be trained to effective pilum use within months. That's why it dominated Mediterranean warfare for 6 centuries. Here's the evidence that makes this undeniable. In 52 BCE at Alesia, Julius Caesar's legions were outnumbered approximately 4-1 by Gallic forces. Roman records indicate that pilum volleys broke 3 separate Gallic charges before hand-to-hand combat even began. The Gauls were using swords and spears, excellent weapons in close combat. But they had to reach close combat first, and that meant crossing 40 meters of kill zone under massed pilum fire. Casualty estimates for those charges range from 30 to 50% before contact. That's equivalent to machine gun effectiveness in World War I. The ability to inflict catastrophic casualties on an attacking force before they can close to effective range. A Bronze Age weapon achieving WWI-era suppression metrics. The physics are straightforward. Kinetic energy at impact is a function of mass and velocity. A 2-kilogram projectile at 30 meters per second delivers enough energy to defeat most ancient armor and inflict lethal wounds. A 9mm bullet weighs approximately 8 grams at 400 meters per second, higher velocity but far lower mass, resulting in comparable kinetic energy but vastly different wound profiles. The pilum's mass means it carries momentum through the target, creating wide wound channels and breaking bones. Small caliber bullets can be stopped by heavy clothing or deflected by bone. The pilum goes through. You're 40 years old now, retired from the legions with your land grant and veteran's pension. Your right shoulder aches constantly from 20 years of pilum throws. The muscle damage is permanent. Your hand shakes sometimes, nerve damage from the repetitive stress. You're trained in how to kill people at range using weapons you can make from materials available in any Roman province. The engineering knowledge embedded in the pilum's design is in your muscle memory, even if you couldn't explain the physics. You've turned dozens of men into corpses from 40 meters away using just your arm strength and a piece of iron. The civilization you served was built on your ability to do this efficiently and repeatedly. The pilum disappeared not because firearms were more effective, but because tactics changed. Medieval warfare emphasized cavalry and castles, not infantry formations where thrown weapons could be employed at scale. By the time firearms matured enough to match pilum effectiveness, the Roman legion had been extinct for 1,000 years. But the physics didn't change. A 2-kilogram projectile at 30 meters per second was just as lethal in 1,500 as it was in 50 BCE. The wound profiles were identical. The engineering principles were identical. We just forgot them, then slowly rediscovered them through centuries of trial and error with gunpowder weapons. Modern militaries still study Roman infantry tactics because the fundamental problems haven't changed. How to project lethal force at range, how to maintain unit cohesion under fire, how to transition from ranged combat to close combat, how to maximize casualty infliction while minimizing exposure. The pilum solved these problems using Newtonian physics and materials available in the ancient world. It took firearms 300 years to achieve equivalent practical lethality in infantry combat. That's not ancient primitiveness. That's engineering sophistication so high that we needed the scientific revolution to match it with different technology. The definitive truth is this: lethality isn't about technological complexity. It's about understanding how human bodies fail under trauma and designing weapons to exploit those failure modes efficiently. The pilum represents optimized anti-personnel weapon design within the constraints of human throwing capability. Every aspect of its construction serves the purpose of penetrating human tissue and causing maximum damage to vital structures. The Romans didn't need calculus or computers to figure this out. They needed 4 centuries of warfare and the institutional knowledge to preserve and refine what worked. The mathematics of killing are older than mathematics itself, embedded in the design of weapons that look primitive until you test them against modern ballistic standards and discover they're not primitive at all. If you've learned anything from this investigation into the actual physics of ancient weapons compared to firearms, hit that subscribe button on Mythbusting, because we're going to keep examining the uncomfortable truths about how civilizations actually fought and what technological progress really means when it comes to the machinery of warfare. The pilum killed efficiently because Roman engineers understood exactly how to make metal penetrate flesh at the velocities human arms could generate. And that understanding was just as valid as anything we've learned about ballistics in the 5 centuries since gunpowder changed warfare. So what weapons technology myth should we examine next? Drop your suggestions in the comments below.